I'm really grateful that we have been asked by LIS to host this wonderful exhibition by Libby Heaney. And this exhibition is a real success, and it fits really well into the program of the Sharing Foundation. So we aim to combine science and arts. Since 2006 we show exhibition in the interfield of science and art, and accompanying this, it's always that we like to bring people together from the science and the arts, and especially to explain more about the science behind the arts. And today, with this really transdisciplinary panel, I'm really looking forward to this evening to learn more about quantum physics, quantum computing, and yes, thank you, you're all here, and thank you again for LIS and the wonderful team. So it was really enriching to us to have you here and can show your exhibition in our rooms. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind words. I'm Amira, I'm head of programs at LIS, and we're very delighted to be welcoming you all today for this talk. It has been an incredible collaborative effort, LIS and the Sharing Foundation presenting Libby Heaney's exhibition that has been on view since February. You're coming to it at the tail end of it. It is closing tomorrow, so for us today is also an emotional day in the sense that we're going to be sorry to see the show go, but we're excited to see it again in London in May, where it will open an Arbeit Gallery. LIS is a young foundation with Berlin as its home base, and as a young foundation we have big dreams, and we're not afraid to dream, and we like to work with artists to help us dream and dream of the stars, but as well as look to their work and their ideas and present them in the context of these shows. As a platform, we also consider ourselves to be experimental, and we like to engage with different collaborators and practitioners in order to explore those topics that are important to us within society and that can help us define our future. Libby Heaney has been one of those artists, an artist who's working with quantum computing, who has helped me, at the very least, understand a little bit every day more about quantum computing, and I'm still trying. I will get there, I promise, Libby. But in light of this, as an organization that is always working in an interdisciplinary way across art, tech, and science, we also like to collaborate with different agencies, such as futurehain, who are also our partners today. Futurehain, with Matyas and Felix, is a creative strategic agency that is also working at the intersection of society and looking for solutions. And in that sense, we are delighted to be working with them today and hosting this panel with experts who have come from around the world, but I will leave Matyas to introduce them properly. This is also a panel that is presented in a very different format, as you will experience, I hope, in a moment. And this is also part of LIS's kind of way of working. We like to experiment. We like to do things a little bit differently, and we like to try things out. So in that sense, I'm not going to say anything more, and I'll pass it on to Matyas, who will introduce our guest today and the panel that will start. And thank you so much for coming, and I hope you enjoy the afternoon.
Thank you, Amira and Katja. I'm in a lucky position because a lot of the keywords have already been mentioned. That it's going to be experimental, that it's going to be about futures, that it's going to be about quantum computing, and that the result of this conversation is still uncharted. And what we embarked on as an experimental format for this panel, we wanted to consciously break this kind of invisible wall that, if I were a mime, I could touch out, that usually exists when it comes to these very abstract and future-paving topics, that the experts just come on stage and they just talk about something and the audience listens and whatever they can take away from it. So today, we will ask you to chart the journey that we are going to embark on, and you will be able to do so by voting. So it's a sort of a game. You'll get a sense of it. Don't worry if you don't yet. And with any game, and the same is true for quantum physics, there are various creatures you encounter. Now, the creature that you probably encounter first in quantum is a cat, right? Like not a cat meme, it's called Schrödinger's cat. And to find out where you come from in terms of understanding the very basics of quantum, we will ask you now to vote and tell us if you've ever heard of Schrödinger's cat. You can do so by getting out your smartphone, scanning the QR code that you can see there. Now, please start. Vote. Now tell us if you've ever heard of Schrödinger's cat. If you have, then press yes. If you haven't, then press no. It's looking pretty good, right? It seems like we have an expert audience here. But just to make sure that this Slido works correctly, now could please those who have voted yes stand up for a moment? So just that we see who has heard of Schrödinger's cat. We're not allowed to. Yeah, that's amazing. No, please keep standing. Now those of you who remain standing who could explain Schrödinger's cat to a kindergartner. Okay, you don't yet have to. We'll might get to it later. Please take a seat. Thank you very much. So, we have tested this concept. I think it works well. This will be an essential part for later on, but this is going to unfold as a sort of like a choose-your-own-adventure type of game. This has its genesis, by the way, in another futurist game that you might have heard of. We will explore this later. But before we get there, what is going to be unfolding here today? As you can see there, and as you have certainly read in the invitation and on the website, it's going to be a guided journey through future scenarios driven by quantum computing. And what does this all mean? The guided journey, I mean, you can see the guide here. I guess that's the straightforward part. As for the future scenarios, the one important thing to understand is the diversity of futures. And this is what you will help us explore, because we don't believe that there's one such thing as the future. We believe that there are a lot of them, and just like with every choose your adventure, such as this adventure that was unaccounted for this panel, we will get further into it. And this will all be driven by quantum computing, right? So that is what is already set. There's the art installation that you might have already seen, or if not, certainly do so. And we'll also hear a few more words about that from the artist. So in these guided scenarios of the future, we'll go through 4 layers. And the 4 layers you can see here, you will get to decide. It will be up to you, just like what we've seen on Slido, that you will get to choose the time scale, the societal arc, such as like what type of society this is unfolding in, the perspective, like is it just our individual level or something of a bigger system, and last but not least, the domain, if it's the climate change, if it's global health, or anything else. And this is why we are so grateful for LAS and the Schädling-Stiftung to have created this space and enabled for this conversation to happen, all driven by quantum computing and driven by the wonderful Libby Heaney's work, who will now ask to come on stage and just very briefly present how she got to this topic and what drove you in creating this wonderful piece that we can see in there. Please, Libby, come.
Hey, oh good, it works. Thank you everyone for being here. It's really great to see you and that you're interested in quantum computing and art. I'll do my thank yous first. So thanks to Light Art Space and everyone there, and Sharing Stiftung, and to futurehain for organising such a speculative and exciting panel, and of course everyone else who's going to join me on the stage shortly. I hope you've seen my artwork, and if not, go and take a peek. Hang out in there for a little bit after the talk. So yeah, how did I get here? My background is in quantum physics, quantum computing. I did a PhD in quantum information science. I'm a mathematician though. I don't build things in the lab because I'd probably break the stuff. So that's why I'm better suited actually as an artist. So relating this to my artwork, so I use data from quantum entanglement, from quantum computers to animate the creatures in the artwork. So when you see these forms deconstructing and moving and becoming plural and becoming boundaryless and formless, this is in part visualizing the invisible processes inside the quantum computer. And I'm so happy to be able to start bringing this weird, shape-shifting, blurry world to life through art. And it's not a didactic experience. I'm not trying to lecture you on quantum computing in the artwork. I'll do that here instead. But it's really a sensory experience. It's about feeling and being destabilized, perhaps, or being moved, or not, or confused, or whatever, but you feel what quantum physics is, and that's important. I think that's what art is uniquely able to do, and I'm really pleased to be able to bring this to life with LAS and Sharing Stiftung, and it's really supported me for the last few years, understanding how can you even create a new aesthetic using quantum computing. So I think I'll leave it there. You're very welcome to come and ask me specific questions afterwards as well. Thanks.
Wonderful. And don't go anywhere, Libby. Actually, please take a seat. So what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word quantum?
I think there's not one thing, there's multiple things, perhaps a superposition of different possibilities. At the moment, if I hear the word quantum, I'm thinking literally about which quantum computer I can get my hands on next to make some artwork. So that's probably what comes to mind.
Lovely. And well, of course, you are an expert and you are an artist working with quantum, but in the audience, you all have different access to quantum as a theme, as a discipline. And now please just look for a friendly neighbor and consider the very same question and just share with your neighbor what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word quantum. We leave a few seconds, so just consider whatever comes up, but please share something among yourselves, like what is the first thing that you think about when you hear quantum? Please just share with each other, like this is your time. Just please take the stage and please give them a warm round of applause. Thank you again for having taken up on this invitation, for taking up on this uncharted quest that we set out to explore quantum futures. Now, before we get to the unknown, let us get to what is known, which is your bio. Would you please just quickly introduce yourselves?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Freeke Heijman. Very happy to be here in Berlin. I'm from a neighboring country, the Netherlands, and I'm co-founder and director of a national initiative there, which is investing heavily in quantum computing and quantum technologies because we believe it's part of our future.
Hi, my name is Christian Ospelkaus. I'm from Hannover and Braunschweig, almost around the corner. I spent a lot of time in the US where I learned the craft of ion trapping. That doesn't mean that I run around in the woods with a net chasing butterflies, but we do this using electric fields in my laboratory, and we use trapped ions as qubits in a future quantum computer. So that's my business, and in my free time I coordinate a major quantum computing project for this that is funded by BMBF, and the project in Hannover and Braunschweig that was funded by the local government at a level of 25 million euros to develop a scalable trapped ion quantum computer, the QVLS-Q1 project.
Thanks, and I'm Richard Murray. So I'm CEO and co-founder of a company called ORCA Computing. So my background is about 2.5 years ago, I decided to leave my very stable job and launch myself into the unknown and start a company to actually build these quantum computers based in London. And so nowadays, my job is quite varied. I work with a lot of very talented scientists. I don't tend to do a lot of the science anymore. I am a scientist originally, but now my job is mainly to help us speak to a lot of people, a lot of potential users and customers of these systems, and really explore the possibilities that are available to them. So it's pretty varied, and I also, unfortunately sit in front of spreadsheets a lot, but the fun bit is talking to users and customers and things.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, and thank you all. And the fun part is to sit in settings like this and to share and discuss some of these ideas, of which I would bounce the first question back to Christian, who's also has been building a quantum computer for a while. You can just take a sip, go ahead. And as a professor of physics and as someone who has been active in this field for so long, so what is the difference between a traditional and a quantum computer? Like how should we imagine this, or why is this such a big deal?
I think it's important to understand that the difference is everything. It's not just more of the same digital stuff that will accelerate anything that you can already do or have been using in the past. It's not something that makes your spreadsheets work any faster, as we all know. It's a transformative technology that will make applications possible that we haven't even dreamed of, and why it's a good idea which is why it's a good idea that we're sitting here together in this explorative setting to see what's in the future.
Wonderful, thank you. And so that's what's different, but what is similar, Freeke? Maybe could you give us an idea about the traditional computing industry and as it built up over the 20th century, and now in the 21st century we are talking about the quantum century. So what is similar, or where are we now in time, like if this was the 20th century for traditional computing?
Yeah, well then I think what's similar is that there when it started, like this new silicon era was starting in Silicon Valley in the 50s and the 60s, we didn't have any idea what the future would bring. There was this transistor, then there was this integrated circuits, and there were quotes like, oh, we believe maybe there will be 5 or 10 or 15 machines throughout the world. We couldn't envisage the future. And I think we're in that stage now with quantum computing, so we're about in the 60s, I would say. So we see it could have enormous potential. It will be transformative. It's completely different. But exactly predicting what will happen, it's just very hard for us humans to look into the future. So we should be humble, but do these explorations.
Yes, thank you. Well, we are humble, but our goals are magnificent nonetheless. Before we dive into that, Richard, we often hear like bits and bytes and all these traditional units in like traditional computing. And in quantum, you often quantify the progress with something called qubits. So could you just explain that, because this might come up later in the conversation as well?
Yeah, happy to. You know, I was nervous about answering this question until I found that all of the audience apparently know what Schrödinger's cat is, yeah. And all of the audience knows how to explain it to a 4-year-old, so I'm on a good footing. So yeah, as Christian was saying, qubits are fundamentally different from bits, which our current computers are built from. So imagine a bit. So every computer has a bit in it, and a bit is essentially a 1 or a 0. What does that mean? It means something, it's a switch. Your switch is either on or it's off. And it's super simple, like everyone's familiar with a switch. It has many different manifestations. It can be current flowing or current not flowing, but it has to either be on or off. Now, the really conceptually, I think, impossible thing to imagine is that in a quantum system, your switch can be on and off at the same time. And maybe you're imagining, okay, you've got a special switch and you can sort of hold it in the middle there. So it's sort of in the middle and it's both one, and it's not at all like that. So a quantum system is 1, so the door is open, and is 0, the door is closed at the same time. So I really want to express this pretty clearly, because if you don't think, hang on a minute, I don't understand this, you're not thinking about it right. As a person, you should fundamentally not understand how this is possible. So if I was a qubit, I would be in Berlin and I would be in London at the same time. And it's that sort of complexity, it's that way that you should look at a qubit. And if I might allow one more thing, sorry, yeah. The thing I love about sort of quantum computing is the reason that's important is because it allows these qubits to hold different possibilities. So it's sort of, a qubit is essentially a sort of possibility engine. And it through being 1 and 0 at the same time, it can hold different scenarios simultaneously. I can be in London and I can be in Berlin at the same time. I can go for a coffee and I can go for a schnitzel. The possibilities can evolve like that all at the same time.
Wonderful. Thank you all for these short quips, and also Libby, thank you once again for having introduced us to your work. Now that was the easy part. Okay, so that's where we are leaving the terrain of what's known. And now we are going to start the cascades exploration and pick on these 4 layers that you can also see right next to me, the time scales and the arcs and the perspectives and the domains. So now is the time to understand what we set out to do. We set out to speculate, and we set out to go into the unknown. So also excuse us if we won't have all the answers. It's very well possible. But nonetheless, we want to give you the chance to decide. We want to give you the chance to tell us what and which of these options to take. And now, if we Felix flip once again, here you see the first set of options for time. Should be quite straightforward, like 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, 50 years. What does this mean? It essentially means how far shall we now lean out of this proverbial window? 5 years is sort of around the corner. You can pretty much guess on what's possible today, what's being developed today, where that will get us in 5 years. 10 years, yeah, it's getting a bit of tricky, and 25 years, you would have to be very, very ambitious. And 50 years? I mean, just think of your grandparents who were your age at the time, or think of the 60s, where the computing industry was where quantum is today. These are the scales. This is the expanse that we can cover time-wise. And again, you get to decide what we'll start with. So please scan the QR code that you can see here, or if you left your browser open, then you can already access it. And please vote. Vote now once, and I'll check my smartphone to see what results you are bringing up. Now you will. So the majority of the audience voted for, drum roll, 25 years.
25 years is really a long time, long enough to get this technology matured. So a thing that is very important for quantum computing is the number of qubits. So 1 qubit, you can be in Berlin and in London, but you need many more to do computations that are of real value. So I would expect that in 25 years, we would have real scalable quantum computers that could compute things that we cannot do with classical computers. For instance, in the field of energy, getting new materials, getting new batteries, getting solar cells that are so good that we don't have this problem anymore. I would expect the energy problem could be over by then. Mm-hmm. So that's a very positive effect of a quantum computer.
Yes, and let me just piggyback on this positiveness and take it to you, Libby. Not because you're negative, but of course, if you've seen the installation, then some of the effects, whether intellectual or emotional, might be on the more gloomier side. Not to prime you for that, but do you have other examples or other potential applications or uses that you would see on this 25-year horizon?
Yeah, so basically what's already happening now, and then I'll take it to 25 years, when quantum computers are fully developed, they will be able to essentially crack or de-encrypt all the current RSA encryption. And there's solutions for that. There's quantum cryptography and post-quantum. There's other modes of securing that data. But what I think might already be happening are these companies, big tech companies, maybe national governments, are collecting data now. They can't crack it yet, they can't look at it yet. But when a quantum computer is fully developed, then you can go back and look at the data that they've collected, harvested. You know, these tech companies harvest all the data anyway about us. And then they can go and look back at different secrets, look back at like what was happening before things were made secure using other technologies. So I feel there'll be some, I mean, where would that lead? If you could read everything that goes on, like national governments, China, America, obviously big superpowers in the world, if you have access to their secret files and so on, even if it was 25 years before, where will that lead us? And that's a real possibility, which often doesn't always get spoken about, because there's a lot of profit involved with building quantum computers, so they typically want to sell them. That's where I'm going to leave it.
I don't know, you mentioned we're talking timescales. When I look back 25 years, I barely had my A-levels and I started to study physics. So a thing that was new in the public perspective back then was the internet and the World Wide Web. But we all know that the technology that's behind really started in the 60s, 70s as a sort of obscure development in the military. So I don't know, are we in the 60s? Are we in the 90s? How far forward do we project our hopes and expectations? And I agree with you that we'll see quite a transformation in the number of qubits, but what I think also has to happen, and we probably know that to some extent, is that the quality of the interactions between the qubits needs to be better, and it needs to get better and better, because that's I mean, if you imagine a couple of light switches, you brought up the picture of switches, and they're all, each switch is hooked up to one light, then it's really, even from a classical perspective, it's not good for much computation, but it only starts if you network things together, and the same goes for the qubits. It's only the meaningful interaction between the qubits that allows you to do any scalable and computation that helps you solve meaningful problems. And that's something where we definitely still need a lot of improvement.
I think there will, to Libby's point, there is a point where maybe quantum computers might not be democratic. You know, there's a race on at the moment. People sort of acknowledge that the US, Europe, is on sort of one camp trying to develop a quantum computer as fast as we can. There's another camp of other nations trying to develop that quantum computer first. And so there's a bit of a race to sort of see who can be the first nation, continent, to harness this power that's possible with these quantum computers. I think 25 years is nice because I think by that time we probably will have moved past that. So there is a point where quantum computers start to become possibly owned by individuals or smaller companies. So I think similar to the sort of timescales of what we've been mentioning for normal computers, we will have lived through that. A computer or a quantum computer is owned by a small number of people, individuals, and there's a whole load of different scenarios we can talk about today around what that might look like. But I think 25 years, I like to believe that quantum computing has a lot of exciting applications for everyone, and 25 years is the time when maybe a lot of that a lot more democratic applications are being, so we might own our own quantum computer and be able to use that for our own route mapping. We might organize our own days with using a quantum computer and the powers that it might have.
Thank you, Richard. And with that, we continue the exploration and we go into this next layer, which has already been mentioned, the societal arc. Now, some scenarios have been mentioned here already, some arguably looking more positive and some looking less positive. We sketched here 4 scenarios, 4 virtual cards for you to pick one from. And the first 2 are the moderately positive, imagine of like a society in growth, an economy in growth as we know it. But of course you can see more complex and more really brutal or harsh developments as well. Now the choice is again yours, and you can tell us which from these social arcs to pick and what developments we should further look into. Please vote. Interesting. Okay, we close the vote now. So as you can all see on your phones, it was really a head-to-head race. And you might or might not be surprised, but the audience was interested in the more extreme scenarios. So it was a head-to-head race between transformation that can entail a lot of positive developments and collapse. And in a very close race, transformation prevailed.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll take it back to you. And let me just take it back to you, Richard, right away, because you mentioned already some of these concrete examples. Now, what, in a general sense, now first just putting this 25-year time scale aside, can be sooner, can even be later, which do you think would be the most relevant applications and use cases of quantum computing for society in transformation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think Freeke mentioned this earlier about quantum computing being really good to try and model nature better. So one thing that you might not know actually that is there are a number of materials, a number of things that exist naturally, which we have no clue how they work. And those examples are photosynthesis, so the way that plants harness sunlight to produce energy. Even your own blood the hemoglobin in your blood is very hard to model. It's quite hard to analyze how those systems work. And there are a number of different materials that we know of, things like hypertemperature superconductors. It's a bit technical, but really advanced materials, super strong materials, that we find really hard to make. So at the moment, we're very bad at copying things that nature does really well. And that leaves us in a position where our materials aren't as strong. We can't capture sunlight as efficiently. Loads of these different things, which obviously society would be transformed quite dramatically if we were able to do better. So, I mean, you might start with simple things like better photovoltaics, so a better, more efficient way to capture sunlight so that we don't have to rely on people in difficult countries supplying us with difficult materials. We can harness our own energy from the sunlight. And I'll leave it to the other panel members. There's a lot of natural sort of materials and natural things that happen, which as people, we struggle to copy and synthesize. And a quantum computer just opens our eyes to how you might make these materials, firstly, how they work, and then secondly, how you might actually make them for ourselves and copy them.
Thank you, Richard. Now, I won't let the other three panelists answer this question in this very broad sense. Now, let's bring these two virtual cards that you have picked together and consider 25 years and transformation. So really concretely think about this perspective that we have already sketched and kind of layer them onto each other. What do you see now? Let me start from this side with you, Libby, if you have anything. But again, like with always, it's fine to say, we don't know. We don't want to say, maybe even. I'll just let you take it from here, whichever of you wants to go first. 25 years in a society in transformation.
I would like to take it from the positive angle. So 25 years, transformation, this whole availability of quantum computing that can help things like Richard was saying, which could increase equality in the world, because if we could overcome these problems that we have now with energy and all kinds of economic problems, we could have more equality in the world. And also maybe in the application space of information technology, the whole optimization process of information and data, and you see it now, like what problems we can have with using information in the wrong way, data that is not at the right time, at the right place. Optimization is a big perspective for quantum computing. So machine learning, things like that. And I would hope for a future where we could solve that problem as well.
Thank you. Libby, the not so positive? Sorry, I didn't mean to.
I was thinking about inequality. So you were thinking about equality, which I really like. But then how, as a society, do we make sure that we achieve this? Because, even in the pandemic in the UK, there were kids who needed to study without digital laptop, without digital computers. And to think that, quantum computers may in 25 years be widely available in our homes, but then we're still like large sections of the world that haven't even got digital computers yet. And I think it's really great to think about how we could solve energy problems or make the world more equal. But there's a writer called Jaron Lanier, and he wrote a book called Who Owns the Future? I think it's probably about 10 years old now. And he writes about how the people with the most computing power own the future, essentially. And I just feel that in 25 years, how can we, transformation for who? I guess that's my point. And I think it's really important to hopefully stay on track with democratizing access.
Well, I think the issue of applications of these devices has been brought up, and you discussed the part of it that basically concerns quantum simulation, so trying to understand anything in nature that behaves quantum mechanically and sort of develop a constructive approach to things such as chemistry, and not a descriptive approach where you sort of try things out. And you mentioned optimization, and I think that the audience may know this, but there aren't really that many quantum algorithms that we know yet. Maybe 3 or 4. That doesn't mean that there are only 3 or 4 applications, but it means that the other application area is not really in the realm of algorithms, but in the realm of simulations and trying to understand nature at the microscopic scale and build something better from that. And I'm very much on the side of the simulations. I think there's still some fundamental questions that need to be resolved as far as the potential of machine learning goes, and as far as the potential of optimization goes, and how complicated these problems are. I'm not saying we shouldn't explore that, but I'm saying that there are still questions that the theorists also need to answer.
25 years I'm trying to
yeah.
dream
No,
the future.
it's right. And, we'll see. I also I still think that even in 25 years, none of us will be running around with one of these devices. Famous last words, maybe. There have been statements like that.
Hopefully not the last.
But I still think the first instance any of us will have come into contact with the results of one of these machines will be because we've used some new material that was designed on a quantum computer, or we've been injected some new drug that has been constructed with the help of a quantum computer, or some new insight that came as a result of a simulation carried out on one of these devices.
Thank you. And a very important thing that Libby mentioned, transformation for whom? And this is the question for the next layer of this cascading future, to take into perspective the various choices that this quantum computing, or the various ways in which this quantum computing could impact what exactly. And here you have the choices coming from your individual level, going up to a level of a city like Berlin, to a level of a whole continent like for us Europe, and the considerations that have been mentioned here, and Europe versus China or the US in a global scheme of things. And last but not least, there's the whole planetary scale which could and would be impacted by quantum computing. Now in this voting you will have the chance to decide, shall we take it to something of a more concrete level, shall we take it to the level of yours, or shall we go somewhere in between? Shall we see how drug discovery might change things for Berlin? Or take it somewhere even higher to a global level? Please scan the QR code, go into the browser, and pick the option now. Thank you very much. Now, this one was pretty straightforward. So there wasn't much of a debate. It seems like the perspective of the planet and how quantum computing can contribute to solving things in the biggest scheme of things. This is going to be what we explore now. And first, again, just regardless of the timescales and regardless of this arc, Christian, I'll take it back to you. What you would say, in which ways quantum computing can contribute on this global scale?
I think one of the most urgent issues of today is energy, as we see these days, and connected to that is transportation, mobility. It's something that we cherish, that we take for granted, but sometimes we realize that this is not a given. It's something that we've worked on very hard for the last decades, centuries, to be able to travel freely, to be able to use the natural resources for being more comfortable, for our health, for our economy. And I think in this area we'll see some key contributions, which will be mostly from material design, I guess. Superconductors is something you brought up. I think if we can solve this issue of transporting energy over long distances, then we solve this issue of for example, being able to take energy that is harvested in where there's lots of sun to areas where it's needed, or to take energy from where the wind blows to where the factories are. We may be able to, and that's the second half of the second side of the coin to develop technologies for storage of energy based on new chemistry. And then another area that you may find doesn't immediately connect to energy, but it's agriculture. The single fact that let humankind grow from 2 billion to 9 billion at the end of the 20th century was the development of the Haber-Bosch process and the synthesis of fertilizers. The energy that's invested in this is huge, and if for many of these processes, for these chemical processes, if you could develop more efficient ways of carrying out the reactions, develop catalytic reactions that run at lower pressures, lower temperatures, that would be a big win, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And now going to the others, and now we are really in game mode, right? So we have already picked 3 of these virtual cards, and we are going to take that very seriously now, meaning that we are now in 25 years. We are in a society in transformation, and this is happening on a global level. So, and I'm just throwing this in the middle, and any of the 3 of you can now pick up. What would you say, what would you expect quantum computing to contribute to have its biggest impact on this transforming society in 20 years from now? Yeah,
I think I'd love to come in. I want to throw a bit of a curveball, I think. I want to sort of try and imagine something that maybe some people don't think about often. So I guess a quantum computer is a machine, ultimately, and it's a pretty amazing machine. And obviously all of us are aware of like what happens with automation is that people fundamentally changes labour as we know it. You know, that's happened before. It will probably happen. Well, it's happening as we speak, and it will happen even more in the future. So I think the curveball I'd love to suggest or put forward is a future where maybe none of us have to work, or maybe none of us have to work on the things that we don't like doing. And I think that obviously opens up possibilities, like maybe some of us are imagining lying on a beach, you know, while machines do all of the tasks that we don't want to do. But obviously also highlights the inequality and the difficulties that might emerge from that if, okay, we're talking about no one's working, but someone has all the opportunities. So one person out of every 1,000 is able to work, lie on the beach, and the rest of us have nothing to live for. But I think obviously this is, well, you know, I mean, what do you do? Well, I think it presents the interesting question, what happens is if there is this ultimate machine which can automate things that most of us don't want to do, and you think of any examples. I'm not saying a quantum computer will do this anytime soon, probably not in your 20 or 5 year horizon, but it's a spectrum, and we're all experiencing not even quantum technologies, current technologies which make life easy for us, reduce the amount that we have to spend doing mundane tasks. What happens when you start to push that to the extreme? And I don't know if the panel want to pick up on my curve.
Oh, yeah. If I think that's a very positive change. How great would that be in the end? And I think humanity will always find new challenges. So, okay, I don't have to do the laundry anymore with my hands, which saves me 5 hours or 6 hours a day. In these 5 or 6 hours, I can read, I can work, I can educate myself, and there are still so many unknowns, like what we discussed when we started this. How is the universe? How does it work with antimatter, dark matter? There are all kinds of challenges that we need to still face. And I would say, if I don't have to do all these spreadsheets anymore, I mean, that would be great, or book my own things, and we could do other things. And I think this equality and inequality thing, to me, that would be the one thing to work on, because to me it feels very unfair that we are here and experiencing everything we experience and others are not.
I do the laundry at home and I actually enjoy it. And I feel I'm also the most qualified person in the family to do that.
Yeah, I leave my laundry to my partner. So there's like a bunch of things that keep flitting through my mind, whether to respond to this idea of automation, and then this idea of automating ourselves, if that, you know, like how we're already being nudged by social media platforms to, be shown the right advertising or to vote a certain way in the election. So in some sense, we become automated already. So in 25 years, how much are we sort of nudged into preferred outcomes for big tech or whoever owns these devices at that time? And then another thing that flitted through my mind was the field of quantum warfare, which is an active field of research, ideas around stealth and navigation and intelligence, and then also, of course, climate change. I was asked this question in the talk we did on the other night, like, how does quantum computing align with climate change? And of course, there's these big promises to do with energy and so on, which is brilliant. But on the flip side, if you go on, I'm not going to say which company, but on a certain company's website, they're talking about optimizing oil routes. And I just feel that, why don't you optimize the positions of solar panels and wind farms instead of advertising that you want to work with oil companies when we really need to be moving towards a low carbon based society? So there's all of these. I think every technology throughout history always has different sides to it. So yeah, that's why I'm always going on the negative side, because I think I'm the only one on this panel doing that. But there's a great promise, but there's also great other avenues as well that it can go.
Yeah, Christian.
Yeah, think about how digital technology has been used. Think about things like Facebook and elections and think about the fact that these things have been developed in the West, in free economies, free countries, free societies, but in many ways they've been turned in some aspects against us by people who didn't develop these things. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I totally agree with what's said, and it means that we should do an effort in the next 25 years to make sure that this technology is used for the better. And I think that's why also settings like this are important, because if you only keep it in the lab with technologists, then this good outcome won't get there. So yeah, we should work on that.
Thank you. And before we cascade to the last layer of this exploration today, now that we explored the biggest scale, let's just take it to you. And as you in the beginning already shared with your neighbors, at least one hopefully, but the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word quantum, now just consider for a moment and think, which part of your life would you like to be improved by quantum computing? You've heard a lot of examples, you've heard how it can transform, especially in this time scale of 25 years. Now just consider for a moment, which part of your life would you like to be improved by quantum computing? And please just share it with your neighbors, just whatever comes to your mind. It's lovely to see that apparently there are a lot of ideas already, which we can discuss in a few moments at the bar once this session concludes. But before we do so, we have one last layer. We have one last layer when you have the choice to decide which of these four you would like our panel to explore, whether that's climate change, global health, social cohesion, or the art world itself. It's up to you now to let us know which of these dive into in a bit further detail before we finish today. So go on, scan the QR code, or if you have this open already, then just go onto the website and cast your vote now. Thank you all. I think the result is quite clear now. It wasn't really a head-to-head race. Somewhat surprisingly, despite Gallery Week in Berlin, the art vote got the least amount of votes. So we'll see what that means for your work, Libby. But what got picked is social cohesion, which is also not surprising considering the arch of this very conversation here. And let me just take it to you, Libby, now. First, regardless of all the other layers that we picked, if you approach this topic in general, like quantum computing and social cohesion, what kind of impacts would you expect the most to come out thanks to these technologies?
Yeah, thank you for going to me first. So, social cohesion. So what makes social cohesion? I guess it's compassion and ability to listen and take on other views. Maybe you don't agree with them, but to kind of accept them or challenge them, but in a way that's less polarizing than sometimes the world we find ourselves at the moment. So how can quantum computing assist in that? Well, I mean, one of the things that I'm really interested in, so maybe I'll take it to the art world slightly, is how the physics that underlies quantum computing is really radical. It has radical concepts in, like entanglement and superposition. This idea of multiple things happening at once really leads us to a way of thinking and feeling that values pluralities and interconnectedness through entanglement, and this idea of contextuality through quantum measurement. These are really different ways of thinking compared to like how we see the world or think of a world at the moment. The individual, and in neoliberalism, individual and is really centered. And I think perhaps what we could learn from quantum computing is if, for instance, artists use it in ways that are unexpected, or other people use it in ways that are unexpected, rather than problem solving, you start to reveal these unusual facets of quantum physics through art or other means. But perhaps that can lead us to a world where we value entanglement and value multiplicities, you know, like to reimagine ideas like gender or so on in a way that's much more strong and becomes more normalized, perhaps. So that's more perhaps a positive note from me.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And with that, I would take it to the three other panelists now in this future that we have cascaded into, right? In which we are in 25 years from now. Society is in transformation, and we see this transformation on a global scale. Now, what uses and what impacts on social cohesion you see in this future setting that you could think of where quantum computing really has a strong impact and influence?
I was trying to suggest I don't go first, because I can't avoid saying I don't know how it could get much worse. I don't know. I mean, obviously, at an individual level, social cohesion is great. You know, we all still get on with each other, but I guess I am sort of slightly cynical about social cohesion because of things, let's face it, things like Facebook, sort of polarizing politics and making us all sort of not be able to speak around the dinner table and things. So, to be honest, I don't know if this is a boring answer. I don't know if I can see a quantum computer changing that, or at least any much for the worse, because I think all the applications we've been speaking about for a quantum computer, you know, they're a lot about the tools that we'll use as humans. I think on that 25-year horizon, I don't think we'll have the quantum Facebook. I actually don't know if it's a boring answer. I'm interested in the panelists' answers as well. I don't think quantum computing will I think it will be mostly led by sort of governments and controlled by governments in a way that I think it will provide us with new materials. I don't know if it will change the social cohesion much from where we are today. That's a bit of a lazy answer, but I couldn't think of another one, to be honest.
I'll let the panelists take it from here. Freeke, Christian?
I'm not entirely certain of this connection that's always assumed between progress on a from a technological point of view and social cohesion. It may be that there are scenarios where the richer you get, the worse things get. So it's not entirely clear that by improving the technical issues of the environment that surrounds us will necessarily improve social cohesion and the state of our societies. I think these are issues that we have to work on at different levels as well. I think one thing that's going to be important for social cohesion is that these technologies that we develop, and this is not only quantum, but it concerns the whole arc of developing science and technology, that we let education catch up with these developments, that people, even those who don't work directly on a technology, get a feeling for what's going on there and get an idea of how these things are being used. And I'm going to be disobedient and connect to the art again, if I may. So something that when I have visitors in my lab, I sometimes like to become an observer of the visitors. So we have this little button that people can push, and it loads an ion into the trap. Now, an ion is our qubit, it's a single atom. And I think for people who visit our lab, it's a transforming experience to push that button and see that that little thing pop up on the screen that's a single atom, because it changes them. It's nothing particularly quantum, but they've started to fool around with a single quantum system. And I would wish that many people, as many as possible, can get that experience, sort of start to understand how these whole things work out. And even if you can't get down into the gory details of everything, I think it's a transformative experience that should be part of our education system. We really need to work on these things.
Yeah, to add on this, because I agree with all that's been said, I think it's indirect. So if there's more wealth, if there's more applications, if there's more time, then there could be, if you do it well, more attention for social cohesion. So that could be, it's like the Maslow pyramid. If you don't need to get your food because that's already taken care of, you can take care of others. But I totally agree, it's not automatic as we see what's happening. So we have to work on that on other realms, I would say. So social cohesion is not driven by technology alone.
Thank you. Libby, any last words to add to this?
I think it's
good, because
okay.
if there's nothing more to add, then it means that we are almost done for today. But we are certainly done with this part of the conversation, after which we'll have one last exercise to close this day before you get to enjoy the drinks and the snacks generously provided by our host here. Before we go there, I would like to ask you for one big round of applause for this fantastic panel. I think this is really a wonderful conversation. And so now it will be really down to you to let us know if quantum is coming, if you think it is or if it does. And we will get to go onto the other side of the space, and we will make you quite literally show where you stand on two questions that we are going to pose to you. So what will happen now is that I ask you all to stand up, to move over to that part of the space. Do this within 60 seconds and then watch for my next instructions. Please come over. Good, so now we are collecting even our fantastic panelists. And as said, we brought two questions. How you feel about the likelihood of it happening, right? I mean, this was an exploration, this was uncharted territory, and we might or might not know if this become a reality. And so that you can all share, and which is why we decided against a simple Q&A to just give one or the other person a voice. Now, everyone in this space, if you think that this future is absolutely unlikely to happen that we just sketched out, then come towards the stairs, and if you think it's very likely that something like this would happen, then go and stay on the other side, like on the bar side. If you're undecided, then stay somewhere in the middle based on how likely you think it is. Here, totally unlikely. Like if you think this is something super far-fetched, come over to this side. If you think it's likely, then stay there. Hi, Libby. Great having you in this corner. That looks overall quite good, right? Like looking now to the scientists and people who are building, it is a very positive outlook. Now, generally though, for these technologies, we've heard some more positive and some more negative scenarios. So now to mingle this further, and now only on this axis, if you are optimistic about the future that is driven by quantum computing, then come to this side. And if you are pessimistic about a quantum future, then please move to this side. Wonderful, thank you. And now take one final look. Try to find the neighbor that you had when we started talking about what quantum is and what the first thing that comes to your mind is. And now look around, look at your new neighbors with whom you can continue the conversation. And last but not least, please, one last big applause to Libby, Christian, Freeke, Richard, Light Art Space, and the Shading Stiftung. Thank you.